Well, good morning, Australian Veteran News viewers. Today I've got the pleasure to interview Heston Russell, a former major in the Special Forces. He's also the founder of A Voice of a Veteran, and he's very recently spoken out against government moves to remove the meritorious unit citation from those who served in Task Force 66. And in doing so, he's also brought into question the leadership of the ADF. Heston Russell, welcome to the program.
G'day, Mark. Thanks so much for having me, and to all those listening.
So let's start off. Before we get going, how about you tell us just a little bit about yourself and why you decided to establish Voice of a Veteran?
For sure. All right. Well, I grew up here in Brizzy. I'm actually up here in Brizzy over the Christmas break, so I apologise for my setup here, people watching. But I grew up here in Brisbane, finished school, and went straight into the Defence Force Academy at the age of 17. So that was 3 years down in ADFA, and then 1 year at the Royal Military College Duntroon before I graduated on promotion to a lieutenant, and then was a platoon commander up at Townsville's 2RR, where I spent 3 years, including one deployment to East Timor and time as the DFSW platoon commander. And then 2010, I was posted into and did selection into the second commander regiment. Mm-hmm. So the remainder of that year was a 6-week selection course. The remainder of that year was my reinforcement cycle. And then I came out of that and completed the majority of my career then in Special Forces, Special Operations Command, before discharging officially the start of last year, January 2019. During my time in service, saw 4 deployments to Afghanistan, including deployments within the Special Operations Task Group, deployments within the classified US Task Force 310/7, deployment to Iraq in 2016-2017, combating ISIS, and then a large number of other deployments and activities in and around the Asia Pacific region and domestic counterterrorism as well. But highlights of my career would be my deployment 2012 to Afghanistan, Special Operations Task Group 18, where I was a platoon commander, and there's been a lot of talk about that in the media lately. And then I have to say also the last 1 year, 18 months of my career spent transforming the Special Forces selection course, particularly working with a great team to turn it into a lot more emotional quotient-based testing and basically bring it into the modern generation. Yeah.
So what you're telling us, you've got very deep insights into the culture, particularly if you've been involved with the development of the Special Forces selection program, and you've done 4 or 5 tours from what I've tried to keep count.
Right, 4 Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq,
So 5 tours. Tell us a little bit. I mean, I think this is relevant to the whole discussion. What was the what was the pace of duty like? The tempo of those deployments going in and out, and did you really get to properly recoup before going on your next one after coming back?
Yeah, the best thing that I can bring to any of these conversations is exactly that lived experience, and I'm not trying to hide anything. I went through a spiral after leaving my service January 2019. And for context, I got back from my deployment in Iraq early 2017 and then went on 8 months leave out of my book that I had saved up over the last 15 years. And then long service leave that I had 6 months worth and took it at half pay. So, I basically had just trucked my way all through my deployment, and I loved it. The best thing I ever found in my career was actually being responsible for some of the greatest men and women that are in our Defence Force. And, when you go through officer training, you get sort of built up to the expectations of an officer. And there's that sort of point in your career whereby some people go down their authority and their leadership as an entitlement. And I was very privileged to immediately understand that I had a responsibility and was empowered by those that I was responsible for. And throughout my career, it never made me very good at appeasing and commanding and accelerating myself up and out, because my satisfaction, my value was derived by, of course, achieving the mission, but doing so in a way that empowered my teams by, with, and down through the chain of command. So,
and I'm guessing this sort of links into some of the comments you've made in the media recently about the generals being politicians. Is that part of it?
For those who've been in the Defence Force, I got to really see it, particularly when I got to 2 Commando Regiment. We talk about Special Forces having a flattened hierarchy and that strategic reach down and the strategic soldier and everything else in between. I got to witness, even at the unit commander, so the Lieutenant Colonel level, their inability, and I say this as even being the adjutant for Ian Langford in 2014 and everything else in between, that the inability for the unit commanders to have literally enough time, space and capability to effectively show leadership to those that they're responsible for, because they're too busy providing management to those above them.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's at the lieutenant colonel level. As we know, those unit commanders are picked by the chief of the army. And, you know, we have the current chief of the Defence Force who skipped a star coming back into service. And all that we are seeing, unfortunately, is a lot of political positioning and posturing as opposed to the authentic application of leadership with the over-reliance of authority to embark, you know, compliance. Yeah, I've sort of, really become a little bit disappointed by that, but I can completely understand how the system has now perpetuated that.
Yeah, all right. We'll touch back on that in a minute, but I wouldn't mind going back to your deployments and how, I mean, I think every single veteran I've spoken to, and from my own experience, when you're on deployment, you love it and you think that's all there is to life, you know. And one of the things that sort of strikes me is I don't know if if we have perspective on deployment. And then you've had a unique situation, well, not so unique these days, where you've been on cycle after cycle. Do you think those people have that perspective when they get put on to the next one and then the next one?
Well, it's interesting. One of my cousins said the other day that it's all about the context of what is the real world. And you know, I used to say my life on deployment, when I look through pictures of my old Afghan deployments and I tell people I used to be cool, and you know, life is so much easier on deployment. And even when I talk in corporates these days, a lot of corporates like to have me come in and talk about combat leadership. And I stand up and I say, you know, even combat leadership is actually the easiest application of leadership, because when you're on deployment, the purpose is so clearly defined. And it's also accelerated by potential emotional aspects such as life and death. So the requirement isn't there to continuously educate and motivate people towards why you're doing things, because they know why they're doing things. You then have to support them personally as they go through things like individual courage and collective courage and things like this. And, you know, being so mission focused and being able to have such tangible outcomes and impacts, you know, it's basically the best, what's it called? You get, you know, it's automatic feedback as far as affirmation you're getting each and every single day. And it's actually kind of that high. It's
a bit of a drug, isn't it, I suppose? And
absolutely.
how much of this do you think is, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of veterans and been involved with some research about the transition phase. And it strikes me that quite a lot of the problems stem from this difficulty in reconciling this identity that you have with your unit, but then coming back into the civilian world and trying to work out where do you fit. And it's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of people to try and work out.
Well, that's it. I mean, I do a lot of work at the moment. We talk about Voice of a Veteran, also talking about what we can try and do in this mental health crisis space in the veteran community. And so many people are putting us down to PTSD and things like this, but it's actually that loss of purpose, that loss of identity, and that loss of responsibility that had us performing, representing our country on an international stage, making decisions that you would never be made anywhere else other than warfare. And then coming back to a lifestyle that is low tempo, that you're no longer needed unless there's crisis, that you feel devalued because you're not able to apply anything different to what everyone else is able to apply. And it's that transition from high performance to low, not even low performance, but just regular performance. I as a part of Voice of a Veteran, we're going to be releasing a podcast where I'm talking to people like Tony Abbott and Ian Thorpe, and people who've had these huge transitions from performance back down to where they are now and every day. And for them, it's very different. But the key difference, as we've now really identifying in the defence community, is that particularly in Afghanistan, the Australian public didn't particularly know what we were doing. You know, they were just proud of our soldiers, our veterans. Whereas, you know, people like Tony Abbott and Ian Thorpe, their entire careers have been so highly publicised so people can understand the difficulty in that progression. And the issues for our veteran community as we transition out of service and start going through these loss of identities, the public needs something to grab onto. So things like PTSD or mental health time bombs or all this sort of stuff.
It's a convenient label, isn't it?
Well, that's it. We like to make things, because when there's uncertainty, we like to make things as easily understood as we can.
Well, I'm wondering if the system that DVA, around DVA or the legislation and everything, I'm not blaming the folk in DVA. They're there to manage the system that they've been given. And it must be an incredibly difficult job because they're so constrained by the legislation itself. But really, for veterans to get the kind of help that they want, they've got to go in and get themselves labelled with the disease first, you know. And this is a serious step for someone to take, rather than sort of, it's not a very positive thing to go out and do. And we sort of wonder why we've got these issues in the veteran community. And you know, and I guess the other thing I was going to sort of speak about, or ask you to speak about, is the issues of, well, whose responsibility is it? Because the veteran community is rallying around trying to help each other, and we've got ex-service organisations, and there's a large number of them, and so you've created another one. It adds to the 3,000 odd ex-service organisations in Australia. It's not particularly focused, but is it the veteran community's responsibility or the public's responsibility? And you know, somebody's got to do a circuit breaker here and sort of fix this. So what do we do?
So many elements to that question, Mark.
Yeah, I know. I rambled a bit, but seriously, it's complex, isn't it?
It is so complicated. But I found a Voice of a Veteran in September after getting to a place in August where I felt so devalued by essentially a DVA system that made me turn myself into, you know, basically a beggar and a victim in order to achieve the smallest levels of support, like for operations or injuries that I had, you know, 10 years ago in service.
Yeah.
And it was from that point in time where I realised that something needed to be done. And Voice of a Veteran isn't a charity, isn't anything. I literally stepped it up as a social media brand because I need an identity through which I can put myself into to then communicate the things, because I struggle with all things from lack of self-confidence and everything that I was allowed to.
So this is a Heston Russell tagline, basically.
Yeah, it's literally it's a costume I need. It's a platform I need, and you know what? I would love nothing more than to take on so many of the topics you've just discussed, and for Voice of a Veteran to close down, to fade into nothing. The biggest issue I have with so many ESOs is we keep trying to reestablish our relevance. You know, for myself and my military career, the proudest time is when, one, your job is done, or two, you train someone else up to be better than you. And at the moment, we're caught in this area of pride and entitlement, you know, as we struggle to hold on to things like our identity and purpose that are now actually in the ESO space, in Heston Russell's opinion, making it even more complicated for our veterans and adding to this uncertainty and this clutter.
Yeah. Do you think there seems to be a bit of a government mandate that every time they speak to a veteran or write to a veteran, there's a bit of a thank you for your service sort of tag on the end of it? I mean, what's your view on all that kind of stuff?
I'm done with tokenism, and if the authentic purpose is there, then absolutely. But, you know, we hear the Prime Minister now adding the thank you to veterans in his speech before, you know, thank you to the custodial owners of the land, yet he will not stand up and asked for a royal commission as to why 700 veterans have committed suicide since 2001. You know, and we all know, because there's a lot to it, and there's been so many governments in between, but it doesn't add up. And, you know, first and foremost, unless you're saying something authentically, and this is the thing I'm really putting into the general public and our wider veterans, we need to thank each other for our service. But first and foremost, we need to understand what that service was. And that's part of sort of my mission and the mission of those who are speaking out. Right.
So supposedly we have a charter, you know, and all this sort of stuff that's going on there. The veteran, the sort of charter. What's it called? The
I'm an Australian veteran.
Sorry.
Is that what DVA put out? The I'm an Australian veteran.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff, and it's sort of like, well, what does it mean? You know, the covenant. Sorry, I'm talking about the Veterans Covenant. Yeah. So we've got this Veterans Covenant thing, you know, and it seems like the government doesn't even want to abide by it itself. I mean, it's a meaningless thing, and really, what's it delivered to us? It's delivered very little, particularly when you look at what they've been able to achieve in places like the UK, where they've actually really taken it very, very seriously. And
I definitely state that comes from a place where they actually understand their veterans and what their veterans have been through and what their veterans' issues are. You know, and this is it. I keep jumping onto this latest Brereton Report and everything that's gone on in the media in response to that, because what it has highlighted is, from a national strategic level, we did not understand why we were there and what our guys and girls were actually doing. It's all the way through to individual accountability on the ground. That's been exposed hugely. And then at the same time, you know, the government's been presented with things like this mental health crisis. And in order to generate the appeasement required for votes or public opinion or whatever, they're trying to provide these band-aid patch solutions or tokenism. But the key element that needs to come down to is, first and foremost, veterans need to take control of the veteran narrative. And that's sort of my number one priority with Voice of a Veteran. I'm sick of hearing others speak about veterans and speak about what our problems are. And as you would know, Mark, you know, my grandfather fought in Korea and Vietnam, my dad in, you know, Gulf War II and Afghanistan, and then myself. there are different, marketing 101, we have different audience segments. And what we keep trying to do is provide broad brush solutions to all the veteran community. And it's up to those individual elements and organizations and leaders within our different veteran segments, first and foremost, to understand their own audience, to then work with all the other segments, and then to advocate to government, because they don't know what they don't know. And I'm finding that so quickly, the more we present them with facts.
It's shocking, actually, when you speak to people who have the authority to make decisions. They don't know a great deal about what's going on or how it all holds together. And I think one of the problems, and I've highlighted this very recently, is that there's a real lack of unity in the veteran community itself. I mean, we're so widely dispersed.
We're our worst enemies. We love cutting people down. You know, we need to actually be aligned on what our purpose is. And, you know, I was expecting a lot of hatred to come out, even stepping up in the media. You could imagine from the Special Forces community, mate, but the support has been overwhelming. And it's just reinforced to me that when you have a true and authentic purpose, you know, everyone else appreciates that and understands that.
What can we do to cut down all the shrill that's out there? Because I mean, there's some of it. I mean, I know it comes from a real point of passion, and they're really trying to solve problems, but then they just spiral into this everything that could possibly be a, you know, some sort of target for making a point. Though, you know, it'll be used in that way, and you know, it starts to, you know, it's a little boy cried wolf type of thing. It starts losing its cachet, and people start going, well, you know, they're just a bunch of whingers, you know, and we've got a real problem with that, I think, and it's sort of the lack of organisation is one of the issues, and perhaps the lack of organisation of our larger ex-service institutions, such as the RSL in particular, is causing us a lot of problems.
I mean, look, to every single ESO out there, you know, and this is, you know, myself included with this as we go along, there has to be regular capability assessments of, you know, what are we doing and why are we doing it? The more and more I encounter and have gone to over the last few months, huge organisations such as the RSL, such as DVA, with these enormous budgets, and just asking for their support in conducting basically what we're doing, which is a communications campaign. Right. Because look, mental health degrade and suicide comes from a loss of hope. The final moments before someone takes their lives, they are in such a level of despair where they feel there is no literal hope that can pull them out of it. And by literally just being able to get into someone's phone, on their computer, somewhere they can hear, see, or listen to what's been going on, you provide that smallest element of hope. And that is, you know, we're in the digital age, it's marketing 101. We need to get out there and be more proactive in this space. And to hear the conversations and statements come back like, you know, that's not what we do, or, you know, in order to pass something like that, it'd have to go through this much layers. And then you sit there and go, look, well, your purpose is wrong. Your purpose is not where it needs to be. Your purpose is empire building. It's maintaining position, entitlement, authority. It's not helping people, because as all veterans know, if something needs to be done, we are able to find a way to do it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is, you know, and I wrote an article recently that the purpose of the RSL is its actions are decoupled from its purpose at the moment, at least in Victoria, I would say. And I
definitely want to probably state, you know, the state and national level RSL bodies are the ones that need so much work. There are so many individual RSL and sub-branches that are doing tremendous work.
And there are some terrific ones too. And this is what I was while we're talking about the RSL, because I mean, it seems like it's a bit of a target of mine, but it's not really. It's really highlights the point we've got problems in the ex-services community itself. But I think the power is in the sub-branches. I mean, there's some terrific sub-branches out there. And so Victoria Hawthorn is a standout. You've got small branches like Warrigal out in the country who are doing fantastic work. You know, there's all these little places that are making a big difference, because they are collecting the voices of the veterans and standing up to them, and they're not doing the mad sort of shrill thing. They're actually taking practical steps. And I think that's where I think we could probably centre rather than try to fix the centre bureaucracy rubbish that's going on in there, we should probably be looking elsewhere. But this is not about the RSL, this is about your experience and I guess some of the things that you've talked about.
On that, Mark, so the key thing we're talking about with all these elements is actually the failure in the current veteran support culture.
Yeah.
You know, and culture, product of leadership, and culture comes from the top down and the bottom up. And, you know, what we actually need to do, and this is what I've suddenly realized over the last 3 months, is that in order to help fix the current veteran system post-service, we have to fix it first and foremost in service. So I'm going to be doing a large body of work tying back into current government and Department of Defence, because there's no point blocking the hole if we're still pouring water into it, into the basin. And then once you've sort of fixed it here and we're not producing, the failure in transition is the huge part. And that's where I can easily backtrack the breadcrumbs to see where I went high from, high performance through to there's a recognition of prior learning and there's how you write a CV and go out and have fun. Once you fixed it there, then you have the ability to then demonstrate through competence and accountability what DVA and RSLs and all these others should be doing, because you're not producing the problem for them to fix. They now have the problem solely in their court to fix. Yeah. And at the same time, we need to activate that modern veteran community to be aligned on the purpose, and by demonstrating that we're going to help work on it this end, to start working on it this end, to engage with their local veteran ESO and hold them accountable, to engage with their local RSL and get involved to make sure they're...
I mean, how can you hold a volunteer organisation to be accountable? I mean, that's not fair either. I mean, they exist for whatever purpose they choose. I mean, this is one of the things about, there is a certain sovereignty with a sub-branch, for example, or a small ESO. You get to do what you want to do for your members and your local interests. And I think this is the difficulty in sort of suggesting that there should be accountability necessarily at these places. They should be accountable to their members, not to the community, right? So
accountable for what they do. If they set out to do this, and this is unfortunately a lot of the ESOs I've learned that they set out to do this. I looked into the books of one very large ESO that raised $4.5 million in fundraising last financial year and paid $3.5 million in staff costs. That there's issues there. When I say accountability, they need to be accountable to what they set out to do and just need to conduct that critical assessment if they are actually supporting our veteran community.
And I think that's a fair thing, because one of the things that I think could be changed or looked at is government legislation around some of these charities and the way they operate, and particularly, when we talk about patriotic funds, that's what they call them in Victoria at least, and the management of them, that there should be some strings attached to the preferential tax treatments and all the other things that come with it, because as you said, some of this is almost an ex-service organisations can become a bit of an industry of its own, and that's fine if it's adding value, but it's actually got to demonstrate the value that it's adding as well.
Mark, the issue is we've turned veterans being victims into an industry in itself. And what we're actually looking at is symptoms. The fact that we have, over 3,500 ESOs means that there's something in the system that isn't achieving what needs to be done, and veterans doing what veterans do. We are problem solvers, and we, instead of keep butting our heads against the system, go and do that. The simple fact that we need advocates for veterans to go through their liability and compensation claims with DVA is a huge conversation in itself. Even last week, I sat with the Interim National Commissioner for Veteran Suicide and Suicide Prevention. And the simple fact that, I was a Special Forces Major in the Commandos. I was sent for everything from being Julia Gillard's personal security officer to assessing embassy business continuity plans, emergency response plans, and solving any problems that need to be solved. And I literally couldn't solve my own admin in DVA. And I need to get an advocate to do it, let alone the high risk demographic that is men and women under the age of 30 who served less than 4 years in defence and have been medically discharged, who are committing suicide faster than 30%, faster than a third of our community. There are the blatant deer in the headlight issues.
And look, I think one of the questions about that, I think we've all spoken about the bureaucracy and the difficulty and the fact that we require advocates and the special knowledge that you need just to navigate the basic system. The fact that when you log into DVA, you've got to pick which website you want to log into. Even today, and they're talking about how much they've fixed it. And it's done a lot of window dressing, but I haven't seen a lot of solutions. And from what you said before about at each end of the spectrum, the ex-service organisations, what's happening in the ADF and what happens in DVA, and plus the state and federal government support things around it. I spoke to Sean Lee the other day, and he was talking about the fantastic programs they're doing to help veterans in employment. It's just one part of the puzzle, unfortunately, but they're doing their best in terms of a state sort of thing. The whole system needs an overhaul where everybody's got a role to play. How do you bring such an overhaul around? I mean, you're certainly not going to do it with a veterans commissioner on its own. It's not going to be enough, I don't think.
Yeah, even on the Veteran Commissioner piece, you've heard me be very vocal about this Royal Commission, National Commission. The issue is we need both. So unfortunately, the veteran community and families have lost so many people that there now needs to be a Royal Commission into drawing accountability for those that have lost. What there needs to be is also this Interim National Commissioner to then conduct ongoing reviews and also accountability and proactive suicide prevention actions. But this is, and this is the plan going forward. You know, I have my whiteboard with different lines of operation, lines of effort drawn up, and it has to be a systematic approach. It has to be the application of, you know, what we are taught best as veterans at our own individual levels, you know, even through, and this is why, mate, the key link that has been missing, I believe, has been the communications piece. And that's why I stood up Voice of a Veteran, because over the last 2 years out of service, I've managed to establish enough friends and awareness of what is, you know, a battle space operating system, information dominance and influence, propaganda, and simply speaking out with the attributes that the Australian public want to hear, that come to us authentically, that we've been trained to do, is how we're going to achieve cut through. And I would love nothing more than to work with any and all veteran organisations that are authentic in their purpose and are actually supporting our veterans, to actually magnify what they're doing, and then at the same time advocate to government, and then again fade back into the darkness once we've done that. But it's actually bringing, in old school language, bringing these things above the detection threshold. And what I've learned is, unless it's in the media, the politicians don't listen to it, and accountability cannot be adequately enforced.
And I guess this is one of the criticisms I've been pushing forward, is that it seems to be that the politicians aren't too interested in listening to veterans or acting on veterans, what we're saying. It just, maybe there's just not enough votes in it for them, or we're so widely dispersed or whatever. And I think
maybe
this,
we need to get some more veterans into government. I have no intentions of getting into government. I just want to help fix this, and I would love to travel around at the start of next year and engage with all the different ESOs within the different states.
But Heston, the sad thing is that there are plenty of veterans actually in government. If you go and have a look around, and you sort of wonder, what have they been doing, you know? And they've been absolutely hopeless.
Politics over purpose. And I mean, look, the last month I've actually sat down and listened with Jackie Lambie for the first time, and you know, she is so genuine and authentic about veterans. You know, her delivery hasn't been the best previously, but once you sit down and actually are able to establish that, hey, this person cares and cares before themselves, she has put service to our veterans.
Well, I can certainly let you know that she's cut through with our audience, and she's and she's had some really good responses to the interviews that we've done with her.
There. And if we need to get these people to step up and be independents, to take up spots in the Senate or whatever, you know, I need to sit with some political people to figure it out. But you know, change needs to happen, or otherwise, you know, like we've been doing with this meritorious unit citation piece, we have been activating the Australian voters to write letters and petition to their local members and their senators. And, you know, it is hitting them hard, and they're realizing that they can't just be token, you know, we need action. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the meritorious unit citation issue. What's the fuss about with that?
What's the fuss? Yeah, it's good. I mean, I definitely want to talk about this in different layers, because you know what, to the majority of particularly current serving veterans in special forces, you know, even myself, you know, you can take my meritorious unit citation, and I didn't join the military for honours and awards. But when you stand up and you say to the Australian people that you are going to punish over 3,000 people for the alleged actions of 19, now we start talking about this culture and this leadership culture that we do not stand for as a veteran community, that we would not stand for internally, let alone want the Australian public to assess our actions and our leadership by. Furthermore, we then need to recognise where this ties into this mental health crisis the veteran community is undergoing. And it's primarily those former serving veterans who, wearing that unit citation on days like Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, are some of the only links that they have to those memories of their former greatness, those memories of those that they've lost along the way. And it is not simply medallic recognition. It is part of their person, you know, all the way through to, there are 20 fallen heroes that I've spoken with almost every single family who have told me comments like, we thought we were over our son's death as much as we could be. 10 years ago, it was meant to be a 10-year reunion this year. This has sent us spiraling back to like the day and the week that it happened. And again, why? And as an Australian, let alone as a former officer, as a soldier, as whatever, you know, that's just unacceptable. You know, if you saw someone bashing an old woman on the street, doesn't matter who you are or who they are, you go and support. You know, you can't stand idly by.
Look, Heston, I've got it. I mean, I really want to know what you think about this. I watched the press conference in which Campbell stood up and made all those comments, and there was a couple of things that really struck me. I thought, how ham-fisted is this? I mean, in one sense, I sort of understand that a meritorious unit citation is a unit award, and if the unit hasn't, this is the difficulty with the meritorious unit citation. It's not an individual award, and I think that's probably something that may need to be reviewed in the future. But then also to say that nobody above the rank of lieutenant had any idea what was going on. And that he had no idea what was going on. Yet I've spoken to people who've indicated to me that they, the barrack room rumours were going around, Australia, that there were things going on. And I just find it almost unbelievable. And you talk about your role as an officer in special forces. You make it your business to know what's happening. And I just can't believe that if all this has happened, all these alleged incidents are proven, how could have actually escaped the attention of those who are closer to those people in their chain of command, Yeah,
I mean, there are so many conversations within conversations, and the key part is we're now assessing actions over 7 years ago in the context of, moral expectations and standards today, once a lot of dust has cleared and settled. And I served within the commando element, of which I believe all have been exonerated from this report. However, I also know what happened over there, in the context of this report. I've asked questions so many times, because we went out on missions. Every single mission we went on, we had to take our Afghan partner force, a platoon of 30 people, and not a single one of them were interviewed in the Brereton Report, because they all were killed when we left Tarancount. They were literally murdered by the insurgents when we left Tarancount.
Right.
And you just imagine just that from informing an inquiry is such a huge piece. And, we basically enabled them to administer Afghan law on the ground and back there. And we went out there and conducted our prosecution of our targets. And for people to say that they didn't know what was going on means that they either failed as leaders or they're lying through their teeth. Because, as you know, if you're a leader, one, it's your job to know what's going on. And if you want to know what's going on, you make sure you know what's going on. And at the same time, you don't sit back and collect individual accolades and awards for your command and leadership in action. However, having said that, what I really don't understand about this whole thing, again, as an Australian, is that we now have an inquiry that has been rigorously done over the last 4.5 years and has now been passed on to an official investigation. But what we've had is trial by media over the last 4.5 years, and now an inquiry that's been released to the entire Australian public and arguably destabilised our position internationally without anything actually meeting the threshold of evidence to then go into a court prosecution.
Yeah, and this is the whole issue of natural justice and so forth. I mean, people will argue on the counter side, though, that, well, these alleged victims didn't receive any justice either. But we've got to apply our own standards as well.
Same as any crime in Australia, the alleged victim has to go to evidence has to be awarded, has to be assessed throughout.
I mean, I think this is getting into territory that I find really I'm uncomfortable with, because there's legal stuff, there's moral and ethical issues that are very, very hard to untangle from all this. But I think the thing that I'm really interested in, I think you could probably make a comment on it, is really about the comments and the way that press conference was delivered, and whether our CDF has actually got the confidence of ADF members anymore, and whether that position is tenable, since after actually making an announcement he was going to do one thing, the Prime Minister basically turned it on and said, no, we're not going to do that, because of the political and I guess the public and I guess the veteran community response to that. Yeah. So how can you be the Chief of the Defence Force after all that and continue on?
The key part for me is he is the Chief of Defence Force in a political position, up and out. He is not the leader of our Defence Force down and through. And he has demonstrated that in more ways than one. From, I believe, back in March, when he made a directive that any uniformed personnel who practice law could not represent any defence member against defence, which I've been informed is not only illegal but immoral, through to where I've uncovered with a team that he actively made preparations to set the conditions to remove the meritorious unit citation and other individual awards
ahead of time.
Yep. Through to standing up and demonstrating officer failure 101, first and foremost, not standing by and supporting your troops throughout this process and establishing a proactive support network for those who are going to be affected.
Just shifted the blame completely.
But then shifted the blame to everyone except for him and his commanders, and done so in a way that has destabilised our position with the Australian public and internationally, and also, unfortunately, has been providing our government and our Prime Minister with bad information. You know, we saw the Prime Minister come out and talk about brutal truths.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that the government actually brought on an independent marketing and PR team or consultancy to support them with the release of this. You know, and I don't know who they beta tested with, but there wasn't soldiers and families affected, or the general Australian public. Yeah. And what you've now seen is the Prime Minister have a sort of a holy shit moment and realise that, hey, what he's done is not only immoral but un-Australian and doesn't sit with the Australian public, and has forced the chief to backpedal. And all my insider reports are the chief and him have had huge fallings out over him making the chief to do so. And also, where has the Chief of Defence Force been in the last month since then? Where has he been saying, hey, sorry, we didn't step up a support for those families? My apology to the families who are dragged into this. You know, we know, and Leadership 101 again is like, you're not always going to have all the information. You're not always going to be right. And you can actually achieve so much more and unify people by, hey, taking a knee every now and then and saying, hey, look, this has impacted us more than we thought. Sorry for that. We need to do this, but in the meantime, we need to do this. Like, where is the leader standing up? Or
even when we made a mistake and we've got to fix this and make this better, or whatever.
Hey,
I don't know. Yeah.
We need to refocus our operational capability. You know, instead it's now being left to politicians to come out and do that instead of our government.
Who's running the ADF? It sounds like it's the Prime Minister and Cabinet, you know, or the Prime Minister's, you know, own office, you know, deciding where we're going and what we're doing, you know.
Yeah, this is we go back to that previous conversation you and I had, Mark, about, unfortunately, the purpose of our senior leaders has not become command leading, managing, motivating and inspiring our tactical forces. It's been providing strategic guidance and political positioning.
Yeah. So given that the way this is all played out, it's all played out extremely publicly, and obviously it's all for everybody to see, including the most junior members of the Australian Defence Force today are watching this and wondering about the quality of some of their leaders and, you know, and the integrity, I guess, of some of the operations we've been sent on, and some of the jobs that they've been asked to do. So do you think that this undermines the capability of the Australian Defence Force, maybe not just in the short term, but in the long term, when you think about, all right, you're trying to get new recruits to come in and do that new Special Forces training program that you designed a few years ago, and, you know, be part of, important military capability, and where's the confidence at the moment for those who are already there, but I guess for people who are actually considering the ADF as a you know, a noble vocation or something they should consider doing?
Absolutely. I mean, the key part for me that provided me with confidence, not only in my actions, but in my ability to support my soldiers on deployments, was knowing that, you know, my hierarchy and my government essentially had my back. And speaking with so many currently within the Special Forces community, that concern is now really wavering. And as anyone who would know who's been deployed, you know, I don't want to talk about heat at the moment. I just want to talk about operational mindset. And that any element of doubt anywhere at the strategic level can potentially creep in tactically. And it's in those elements of doubt, those pause and those hesitations, that lives and limbs can be lost or saved. All the way through to speaking with those who have, you know, members of their family wanting to join the Defence Force. You know, my nephew is 16 and tells me he's been wanting to join the military for so long. And at the moment, unfortunately, and this is the saddest thing for me to say, being such a proud veteran myself, I'm not comfortable with him currently joining our Defence Force, because I don't feel that the system, one, is in place to demonstrate maturity in its leadership and approach to supporting its members. But secondly, through to the current transition system that we've spoken about, that is essentially accelerating the degrading mental health decline about our veterans. So there needs to be a body of work to re-establish a culture of leadership that shows responsibility and support to our veterans, all the way up to government and strategic level. And these processes that support our veterans through the lifetime of their service and post-service support.
So Heston, we've discussed some really big ideas, big concepts, but what are some of the practical things that you think can be done? So let's just focus on the families of those who, you know, you mentioned the families of those who have fallen and, you know, who've been reminded because of this whole meritorious unit citation issue and all that sort of thing. What are some of the practical things that could be done now to provide the support that they need? I mean, we can't turn back the clock. The situation's occurred, the debacle's happened, but what can be done today to help them through this difficult time?
So those families are really receiving a lot of support. You can imagine they're the first line that we rush to and put ourselves on the fire as needed. And I've been talking with so many of them, and to be honest, a lot of them at the moment just need to be sort of left alone, particularly by media and things like that. And we're trying to support that.
Yeah.
But anyone who knows those families, just providing that support, particularly around key times, we're coming to Christmas, New Year's. They're those renowned periods. But as far as the veteran community goes, opportunity out of chaos and risk is that the optic is now on our veteran community, and particularly our contemporary veteran community during the Afghan campaign. And while all Australians have now been forced to make decisions and have had negative information put into their head, what we are starting to do is actually help educate and provide some understanding to what we're doing. And the more veterans who can now turn to and be more comfortable in having these conversations, current serving and former serving veterans, with anyone who asks, with anyone in their immediate family, with people they come across, not shying away from these conversations. Because the more that we can help educate the general public to understand from firsthand experiences, the better we are making the post-service environment for all potentially transitioning veterans. The better we are helping to educate the Australian public on what we did and why we did it and who we actually are, as opposed to second and third hand in the media. The opportunity for every veteran in their own circle, in their own bubble, is to take control of the veteran narrative. And not because you want to better understood yourself. Put again service before yourself, because that's where we operate in the most comfort. And do so because what you're doing might help that person better understand and support a future veteran.
So I suppose part of your personal mission is to provide a framework for that narrative to hang off so that people can put it together. I mean, not everybody's necessarily a great communicator or great at doing that. And we've seen the problems that creates, obviously. So is that part of what you're trying to do with a voice of a veteran?
I don't ever want to teach people how to speak. I want to teach people why to speak. And again, the key thing is have those conversations because you want that person to be better educated on what a veteran in general is. And have that conversation in the context of, if there was another veteran sitting next to you that you didn't know, would they be happy in the way you're doing it? Like you're not trying to promote yourself or things like that. If we all try and work towards that authentic higher purpose, that is to help educate people to understand veterans in a selfless way, those conversations are natural, and those conversations need to be natural. As we know, again, marketing 101, people need to hear it and see it from a variety of different sources so as they can absorb information in their own different ways. It's just the current issue with our veteran community is that people shy away from those conversations, don't feel that they are appropriate to have those conversations, don't feel comfortable in themselves. And first things first, reach out and speak to another veteran and discuss these ideas. Like you and I having this conversation here, Mark, helps me formulate these conversations and opinions in my head. Then go and have that chat. And Christmas, New Year's, ask people at the family table what they think about what's going on. Hear what they think, provide your first-hand experience, and together, you can start achieving those 1% and 2%ers that really make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things.
So Heston, look, I think we've just about used up the allocated time. You've been very generous with that. I'd like to just give an opportunity for a closeout, I guess, comment or question. What would be your message to the veteran community and the government as a sort of a final piece to this interview?
Sure, mate. I think much to what I just said before, my message to the veteran community is, first and foremost, veterans helping veterans has to be our first and last line of defence. Please take the time now over the Christmas and New Year's period. I don't know when you're going to post this, but also continue on from that and reactivate those chains of command, those tactical chains of command. If ever you have worked with someone or been responsible for someone, that responsibility has to continue after service, because there is nothing like military service, putting service before yourself. And we need to be the ones to reach out and connect with and engage our veteran community. To those of the general public, please reach out and connect to a veteran. And as opposed to take what you see in the media as the first and last opinion, ask them their opinion and their first-hand experience, and ask them in a way that makes sure that they tell it to you, because it is uncomfortable for us to talk about themselves, but we need your help as well. And then for everyone, we're going to be approaching an election year this next year, and really sit down and start to think about why you're voting and who you're voting for. And we all have the ability outside of election time to speak to our local members, to advocate for things that we don't agree with within our society. And that's how we can support changing and improving our collective culture as veterans and as Australians. So so much that can be done in our own individual bubbles, and you know, connect together, support each other, and take action. Don't just talk about it and whinge. Do something about it.
Do something about it. Heston Russell, thanks so much. Terrific stuff, and thanks for joining us.
Mark, really appreciate it, and good luck to you all.
Thank you.